Hi, this is Emerald and welcome to the Diamond Net, and today I'm going to be sharing with you 2 common misconceptions about integrating the shadow. Alright, so in my last 2 videos I talked about shadow work and how the ability to integrate the shadow is largely contingent upon our ability to drop judgments and to learn to love and accept ourselves and others, as well as to recognize within ourselves traits that we would habitually judge away or repress. And so from this standpoint of wanting to integrate the shadow aspects of the self, I think it's important to make a distinction between the light shadow and the dark shadow. Now this is a concept that I got from somebody named Will Sharon, who actually took a course with. He's really awesome. You should definitely check out his YouTube channel. I'll link it down below. But basically, the light shadow could be things like hidden potential that we have, like things that we've repressed away that can actually be expressed in a positive way, or at least in a neutral way. Things that don't cause any issues. Now, a lot of the misconceptions come from the idea of integrating the dark shadow. Alright, so an example of the light shadow would be, let's say a naturally creative person is born into a family of staunch pragmatists that look down on creativity and anything that really colors out of the lines. Now, if they fully conform to that familial structure, what will happen is they'll likely repress the creative aspects of themselves. And so creativity itself will get relegated to the shadow. And so in that sense, the shadow is sort of like, in this regard, sort of like the treasure that's hidden in the dragon's lair. There can be some negative things in the shadow, but there can also be very positive things in the shadow. So with the light shadow, we really want to be able to reintegrate that. But when it comes to reintegrating the dark shadow, there are some obvious issues that come from that. But it's still important to be able to integrate it, but it's important to be able to understand exactly how to do that. And that's why I'm addressing the misconceptions that I'm about to go over. Alright, so here are the misconceptions. The first misconception is, if I don't repress away my destructive tendencies to the shadow, then what will happen is that I'll have to express those harmful tendencies. So that's the first misconception. The second misconception is that we should judge those who act from the dark shadow, who do those terrible, destructive things because they deserve it. Alright, so let's dig into misconception number 1. So basically with this misconception it says, if I don't repress these destructive parts of myself, then I'm going to have to express them and do the harmful things. So let's say, for example, I have like greediness as part of my personality and I want to push that down to the shadow. And so the idea is, if I'm trying to reintegrate that trait, then I'm going to have to express greed or do things that a greedy person would do. And so that's not what shadow work is at all. You don't necessarily need to express that trait, because expression and repression are not opposites. Awareness and repression are opposites, and acceptance and repression are opposites, but expression is not the opposite of repression. So if we have some kind of destructive trait that we know if we express it, it's not going to be good for us and it's not going to be good for others, then there's no need to express something in order to avoid repressing it. So I've met some people who actually have this misconception that in order for them to not repress, they have to be able to express whatever tendency it is. So one person that jumps to my mind right away is somebody who is struggling with anger issues, who's chronically angry. And they would basically say, it's like, well, yeah, if I don't yell and if I don't like break things, then none of that anger is actually like coming out, and so I'm just bottling it up and repressing. And so I have to shout and I have to do these destructive things so that I don't repress anything. But of course that's the wrong way to think about things. So the idea is, let's say that you have an issue with chronic anger. You want to become aware of it and you want to accept it as part of yourself. Become as aware as possible. Get to know it from all angles. And what will happen then is you'll notice that there's a shift in perspective and you start to see what's underneath the anger. And as you go down further and further into the shadow, you'll find that the most destructive tendencies often have a very, very innocent beginning. They grow from a seed of like a time maybe when somebody was going through a very traumatic situation, oftentimes in childhood. And if you, let's say, draw back the idea of like that chronic anger, they can maybe follow that back to a time as a child when anger was the only thing they could resort to get control over their life. Maybe they had abusive parents or neglected neglectful parents, and the only way to become recognized was to express anger. And so when you become aware of and you accept your shadow traits, oftentimes the more destructive traits, you don't need to express them, but they'll lead you down into the reason why those destructive traits are there in the first place. Also, another point that I think is important to go over relative to this misconception about repressing destructive traits, the paradox is the more you repress, the more likely you are to express the negative traits. So if we are fully aware that we have these destructive tendencies, we're a lot more likely to recognize it and say, oh, okay, no, I don't want to express that. Whereas if we make ourselves unaware, which is what repression is, it's a complete blinding ourselves to what's going on internally, we're a lot more likely to find rationalizations and justifications for why it's okay for us to express a particular trait, or to find ways for us to create a kind of backdoor solution for expressing that trait. So again, if we think about reintegration as being about awareness and acceptance as opposed to expression, what we can do is then we can shift our idea about what it means to reintegrate, and we can notice what behaviors should be compartmentalized or expressed in a non-destructive way. And then we can also become aware to the point where the emotions that are coming up and those traits that are coming up can lead us down, again, to what that core reason for the destructive traits are in the first place. Alright, so the second misconception that I see most often on my other videos on the shadow is that we should absolutely be judging people who commit these destructive acts and who do bad things because they deserve it, and they shouldn't be let off the hook for their bad behavior. But again, this is a misunderstanding of integration. So integration is not about apologism. It's not about letting someone off the hook for destructive behavior. And it's not about giving the green light to destructive behavior, because obviously that wouldn't be good for individuals and it wouldn't be good for society at large. Now in this next part of the video, I'm going to be using as an example people who have committed the worst crimes against humanity. People who do genuinely heinous acts that if we let those things, like those people run rampant and do what they do, you know, it just leads to all kinds of chaos and murder and destruction and suffering. And so I'm using these extreme examples to show why we shouldn't even judge them. But when I'm saying we shouldn't judge them, that doesn't mean we should let them off the hook for what they've done. That doesn't mean that we should become an apologist for their ideas or for their actions. It doesn't mean that we should just accept anything in society all willy-nilly, or anything in our behavior all willy-nilly. But basically, it comes down to the difference between judgment and discernment. So understand that boundaries and standards are still important, and the idea isn't like, so if I use Hitler for example, it's not like, oh, you know, Hitler was just a really good guy, or, you know, like that kind of thing. What it's about is about recognizing the darkness in ourselves and being aware of it so it doesn't sneak into the driver's seat, and so that we can become aware of it and we can see the roots of it. And that's what's really important about shadow work, is being able to be aware of your entire internal state and not leaving anything in the blind spots. Alright, so let's talk about the difference between judgment and discernment. So let's take the Hitler example. So what discernment would mean is basically being able to call a spade, being able to say things like they are, or like they were in this case. So I could say that Hitler committed many crimes against humanity. I could say that a society ruled by Hitler or a Hitler-like person is an unhealthy society. It's not good for human beings. Or I could say, when I think about the acts that Hitler did, I feel a sense of disgust. All of these things are using a sense of discernment. So none of these things are a judgment, nor is the feeling of disgust. So this works with feelings as well. So a negative feeling about something is not in and of itself a judgment. The main thing that makes something a judgment is when we create a counter identity to whatever that person is or whatever that trait is. And so this is what a judgment is. It's basically saying, I'm nothing like that, and then identifying in such a way that we put our blinders on to everything that resembles that person. So if I look at someone like Hitler and I say, oh, what a terrible person, I'm nothing like that, what's going to happen is that I'm going to have this concept of myself, and any dark thing that relates to Hitler, I'm not going to notice in myself. And so this is a problem because everybody has a certain darkness inside of themselves. It's just an aspect of the internal landscape. There are genuinely destructive things that are just there and are there for everyone. And this is why I think in the Bible, and I'm not 100% sure this is an exact quote, but it's something that I can recall being spoken about when I went to church when I was younger. It was basically the devil is in everyone. And I never quite understood what the quote meant at the time. And basically the idea here is that everybody has this darkness inside of them. And what happens if people hyper-identify with goodness and with the light, what happens is that we lose track of the darkness. And like I had said before, that's when the darkness takes the wheel. That's when we start to not notice when we're doing very destructive things that cause ourselves and others suffering. So let's take someone like Hitler himself. I'm willing to bet that he hyper-identified with goodness and righteousness, and that he thought the cause that he was going toward was a really good thing. You know, and obviously we can look back and see how much suffering he caused, but it was his very identification with goodness and to call other people bad that enabled him to have that sense of superiority over the various peoples that he oppressed and murdered. So with the topic of integration and with not judging ourselves and not judging others, it's very, very important to eventually work your way up to being able to recognize the connection between yourself and even the most heinous person. But this is advanced work here. So this is not what you start shadow work out with. You don't start shadow work out with Hitler. You start shadow work out first with your light shadow, integrating unrealized potentials. Then you go to people who maybe kind of irk you a bit and like are maybe expressing some mildly destructive things and start to understand that. And then you work your way up to the most heinous people who do the worst crimes against humanity. And then you can start to notice your own dark shadow and that destructive drive inside of yourself. So if you're not ready for it, if you're not prepared, what can happen is you can fall into apologism and not really being fully aware of the gravity of the situation and kind of falling into that naivety of saying, oh, that Hitler, you know, maybe he wasn't such a bad guy after all. That's not the point in this. Yeah, obviously he was a bad guy, but we need to recognize that there's a connection there. Or what'll happen is that you get a glimpse of that dark shadow, that really genuinely destructive drive within yourself, and you get a lot of like shutting down. And so you want to take this gradually, and then you can move down to the more advanced things where, like, you know, perhaps there are issues that you have with a certain family member who really traumatized you as a child. Like, that's even quite advanced. It's hard to accept a person like that, and it's hard to accept the aspects of yourself that they represent to you. So as a general recap, again, you want to make sure you distinguish between discernment and judgment, and you should also distinguish between expression and just acceptance and awareness. So those are really the two main things that you have to stick the landing on when it comes to shadow work. You're not just like, you know, you're not just becoming an apologist for all kinds of terrible things, and you're not doing all kinds of terrible things. It's largely about awareness. It's about your ability to open your eyes and shine the light on aspects of yourself that you would otherwise reject. Anyway, that's all I have for now. I hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, go ahead, click the like button below and subscribe. Also, leave me a comment. I love hearing from you guys. And if you feel like you know anybody that would really enjoy the content, please share this video out to them. I also wanted to say thank you so much to my patrons. You guys are really awesome. Thank you so much for supporting me. Also, if you would like to get weekly updates on whenever I post videos, visit my website at thediamondnet.org. I also sometimes send out like notifications, like if I'm giving away, like let's say a discount or some kind of contest relative to my life coaching, dream work coaching, and tarot reading. So if that's something you think you would be interested in, be sure to sign up for content updates on the website, again, thediamondnet.org. Also, just to give you a brief rundown of the services that I'm providing, so basically with life coaching and dream work coaching, it has to do with really like sort of getting your bearing on what you would like to do in life, and then being able to take yourself in a particular direction to reach your goals. With life coaching, a lot of it has to do with asking questions and giving you sort of a space to like explore, and then sort of setting down certain action steps and being a strategic partner toward you going toward those certain steps. And with the dream work coaching, it's basically the same thing, but we use the dream as a start. So the idea is like you're getting in touch with what your subconscious is trying to tell you. And so you're using the messages presented by your subconscious mind and using that as the basis for the coaching so that you know what steps that you need to take in life to bring yourself more into alignment with what the subconscious is trying to bring you toward. And with the tarot reading, a lot of times people will come to me for that, for a sense of clarity as well. So if you're looking for a sense of clarity and right now you're not sure which direction to go in life, I highly recommend signing up for those. Anyway, that's all I have for now. I hope that you enjoyed the video, and until next time, keep becoming more you.